Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar this lunchtime. My name's Helene, I'm from West Vic PHN, working out of the Geelong area, and alongside me is Jade, who will be doing all the IT for this meeting. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So welcome to our event today. Just see on your screen there, I think we've got a couple of events that are happening for the remainder of the year, but we're winding down as we get closer to December. A little bit of housekeeping. For today's meeting, participants will be put on mute for the course of this meeting. And should you have any questions, if you could type them in the question box, and I will address them on your behalf. So they'll all be answered anonymously, so just keep typing them in and they'll be answered at the end of the session during question and discussion time. Our presenters for today are Ruth Crampton and Martin Botros from Avant. And could I take this opportunity to thank Avant for their ongoing and continuing support of our education program and for the partnering with our West Vic PHN for today's event. So we do thank them very much. They do put it in a lot for us. Thanks, Ruth. I will now hand over to you.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for having us once again. I'll just move that in case you can see my face on the screen. Just confirming that everyone can see the slides okay. Let me know if there's any problems.
All good.
Beautiful. So I'm here again to speak to you. Today I'm talking to you about cybersecurity and data breach issues, and then I'll pass over to my colleague and friend Martin, who will talk to you a bit more about privacy, communication and social media in the practice environment. And like Helene said, we'll take questions at the end. There is a PDF of the slides and a second PDF that has links to relevant fact sheets and resource pages about all of the topics we're discussing today. So feel free to have a look at those and download them. It is going to be a bit of a flying visit to these topics, but there's plenty of information in those pages we're providing. So just to start off with setting the scene with regards to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is, you're probably well aware, an increasing issue, especially in the healthcare setting. 1 in 3 Australian healthcare organisations embed cybersecurity and awareness training in their policies and procedures, but that means that 2 in 3 don't. And so it's really important for staff to be prepared and aware of some of the cybersecurity safety measures and how to manage if there was an attack to occur. And so part of what we'll be talking about today is what you need to do to prepare. In Australia, one cybercrime report made every 10 minutes, and it costs in excess of $1 billion. And interestingly, 58% of these attacks could have been prevented if the systems were maintained and the available security patches applied when they are needed. The current challenges in cybersecurity, the things that are quite commonly seen in our world today, the one that we probably know the most about or hear the most about is ransomware, which is when the systems are locked down or data is taken for some reason, and then money is requested in order to release that data. Another common cybersecurity challenge is this credential harvesting malware. So that's like phishing emails and other means. These days it's really inventive text messages, all sorts of things designed to take your personal information and your personal data, which is then used for nefarious reasons in terms of accessing your fundamentally it's accessing your money, right? That's the end game. And finally, social engineering. These are more personalized attacks where somebody calls and tries to engender themselves to you or to the person on the other end of the phone. And, you know, these are the people that ring and say, your computer system's been hacked, you need to give me $50 to install a patch, or, you know, I'm so-and-so calling from the ANZ, I need to update your account information. I had an elderly father-in-law who was a big fan of Andre Rieu. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the man's work, but he's a violinist and classical musician, and Ron was a big fan of Andre. And every now and again, he would get an email that said, "Dear Ron, blah, blah, blah," some sort of sales information, "love Andre." And he really honestly believed that Andre sat at his computer and typed in this email every month. And as an elderly person not savvy in the ways of the digital age, you can see how easily it would be for somebody to manipulate and get information out of someone as vulnerable as Ron was, who honestly believed that Andre Rieu sent him an email every month. There is some quite good systems and supports from a government perspective. The Australian Cyber Security Centre is one, and my advice is to any practice is to have one person for whom cyber security is their portfolio or their focus, and then they can go to the Australian Cyber Security website and register. And then you automatically get sent updates about common attacks, common phishing emails, common viruses, and things that you need to look out for. And then that one person can disseminate the information throughout the rest of the practice staff, perhaps as a standing agenda item on a practice meeting. The Australian Cybersecurity Group has what they consider a list of best practice in terms of ensuring your systems are cyber safe. So some of these things may not make much sense, but I'll try and explain them for dummies, which is me in this area. So the first thing is application whitelisting, which means that you only allow certain software onto your practice system. So a staff member can't go and download something because they want to use it, you know, some kind of new program or application. They have to go through a system like at Avant. If I wanted to download something onto my laptop, I'd have to go to my IT team, and they would have to download it for me, check it, give me the authorization code, etc. I can't just randomly add things to my laptop. It would have to be the same in a practice. Patch applications are fixes for known problems, and so ensuring that your patches are kept up to date through your IT team. The next thing is Microsoft Office macro settings, and these are automated tasks that Microsoft sets up, and being aware of what they are and how they might lead to errors, making sure that these only happen with your authority or with your acceptance rather than being automatically allowed to change. The next thing they discuss is application hardening. And what that means is, you know, when you open something up, or even if you're on like the Age, you know, website, or, you know, some kind of shopping app or something, there's all the flash content, and there's all those cookies and all those plugins and extra things that come down with it. So application hardening is making it more difficult for those things to happen automatically, and you have to manually agree. And so you're on top of what you're accepting and what you're letting happen automatically. Restricting administrative privileges. So in a practice environment, that would mean having restrictions of who in your practice can do what on your system. So not everybody has full access, but that there are certain high-level users that can, you know, download the software and make, you know, high-level changes. It's also something we're thinking about when we're talking about data breach in the next section. Not every staff member needs access to every file. So if there's some ways to limit that. So for example, at Avant, I work in education, and there's a lot of really sensitive information about doctors and lawsuits and claims and complaints. I don't have access to any of that. I can look up a doctor and see their email address and their phone number if I need to get in touch with them, but I don't have any idea of any of that highly sensitive information because it's not appropriate for my role. And it's important for the members of Avant to know that their information is really held quite securely, and that not everybody can have a look and have a nosy read. Patch operating systems, again, similar to the patch applications, but it's just the systems behind the scene that fix things. And then multi-factor authentication. As you know, these days, a simple password doesn't really cut it when it comes to keeping things secure. And if your practice systems don't already have multi-factor authentication, they should, or no doubt you're working towards it. But for most things these days, you know, you log in and then you get a text message to your mobile, or you'll get some secondary measure of checking who you are, Face ID, you know, that kind of thing, in addition to a password. And then daily backups. So when it comes to backing up your data, the recommendation is 3 copies. So first of all, the files that you work on in your practice. Second of all, some kind of cloud backup system that automatically backs up your files. And then third of all, a physical hard drive that daily or weekly or however often the practice your IT team suggests you do a manual backup, and you keep that in a separate location, not in the practice, in case there was like a disaster, like a fire or that type of thing. One thing to say about cybersecurity is that human and data breach as well, actually human factors really matter. So having well-trained staff, having staff that know what to do if they come across a dodgy looking email. They say 60% of cybersecurity incidents are attributed to someone doing the wrong thing on the inside. And so it's important to, to make sure your staff are really well trained. In terms of the security that you have in your systems, you will have antivirus software, you will have firewalls in place, and these things can be hardware and software. I like to describe them with an analogy that looks at these things in terms of your house, your home, and your home security system. So a firewall is best visualized as a big security fence around the outside of your house, that if you want to get through that firewall, you need to go through the gate and you need to have a password in order to get through, and you can only get through that approved manner. You can't, like, the gate's too big to climb over the fence. You can't get through any back end way. You have to go through the appropriate entry gate. And then the antivirus software is like your home security system. So if somebody does in some way get over the firewall, and they try to break into your house, then the antivirus software will send an alert. So you will have a burglar alarm or flashing lights or some other kind of alert that will let you know that somebody's trying to get into your house or get into your computer system, and so you're aware that there's a danger there. And that's what the antivirus software does. Now, if we're talking about, previously we were talking about patches. Patches are fixes to known problems. So that would be having a window open or a door unlocked, or something that the burglar could easily come through unless it's addressed. So addressed by shutting and locking the window or shutting and locking the door. And having a patch available that you're not using is like leaving doors and windows open and inviting people to come in and rob you or attack your practice systems. So hopefully that analogy makes sense to you. One other thing to say about cybersecurity is to really plan for the unexpected. So you can't, I used to say when I gave this talk, it's not if but when. Sooner or later something will happen and you'll need to know how to deal with it. But I went to a workshop on this stuff, and they said, it's a really silly thing to say, not if but when, because it's the wrong way to approach it. The best way to approach it is to say, be prepared. And so instead of not if but when, the mantra is be prepared, and be prepared for something to happen at any time. And the best way to be prepared is to have good backups, three sources of backup, as well as having a sound recovery plan, so that if something does go wrong, you can rectify it in the best, soonest, most expedient manner. Now, one thing any good practice managers or practice organisation knows is the value of policies and processes. And so in terms of cybersecurity, it's really important to have a cybersecurity policy, which outlines best practice. It outlines the expected behaviours from staff. I mean, there's been certainly incidents of whole systems going down because a staff member plugged their mobile phone not into the wall to recharge, but into the actual computer on the reception desk, for example. So in terms of best behaviour and how to keep your system safe, there should be a policy that outlines that. The policy should say things about what happens if you want to take a device off site, what happens if you bring a personal device on site, what education is required for staff, what's the best practice in terms of passwords, what's the policy and process for backing up systems, how often are they backed up, how often are they tested, what's your regulations in terms of whitelisting apps and what apps you can and can't have on your systems. Who has access to what and who's in charge of that? What's the role of the person who's allocated cybersecurity as their portfolio, for example. And then a second part B of the policy, or a separate policy, as a cyber response plan. So what happens if you experience a cyber attack? What's the immediate actions you need to take? What's the contact details for your IT provider? What staff is responsible for what role? Who notifies patients? Who notifies the practice principal? Who notifies, responds, deals with the media if that's necessary? Who knows what to do about the backups? You know, all that kind of information, the phone numbers, the provider details, all of that information should be in your response plan policy. So hopefully you all have those. So if you were turning up to work one day and you went to turn on your systems and they didn't turn on, how would you know that was a cyber attack? Or would you assume that the system was just taking its time to boot up? Or would you assume that somebody just hadn't turned it off properly? I mean, how would you know what to do, and how would you know what not to do if you were the first person turning up to work on a Monday morning and you couldn't get the systems up? So it's really important that your staff are well educated and they know what to do, and recognizing if you are under attack. And it's a bit like, you know, when I was a nurse historically, and they used to say chest pain is a heart attack until you can prove it's something else. And it's a bit like that. If there's a system problem, it's a cyber attack until you can prove it's something else. So you always have to treat any initial problem very warily, as if and assuming that it may well be something malicious. So if your screen doesn't start, if your system repeatedly crashes, if your browser jumps around to unwanted pages, if your antivirus software doesn't appear to be kicking in, if ads pop up on your screen, if your mouse or your printer or your scanner or something just isn't working as it should do, you always have to err on the side of caution and assume that there could be something terrible going on in terms of a cyber attack. So if you were attacked, would you know what to do? Would your staff know what to do? I mean, there's certainly first aid, or, you know, your initial response, which is really important. So part of that initial response is, for example, unplugging every item from the wall. So we've had practices that have had, the reception staff have had a known attack. They've unplugged all the computers in the, or not a known, it's just been suspicious of an attack. They've unplugged all the computers in the reception area. They've, you know, been in a flurry trying to contact the IT department. Meanwhile, a doctor walks in the back entrance, goes into their rooms, turns on their computer, and the virus gets through the rest of the system. So what you need to do is not unplug just the computer that you're standing in front of, but go around the whole entire practice and unplug everything that is linked, including scanners, printers, you know, all laptops, computers, everything, so that nothing has access to the system. We've had other practices that have come on, their system hasn't booted up correctly, so they've gone, oh, no worries, I'll just go and get the backup. So they go into the safe, get out the hard drive, plug it in, and then all of a sudden all their backups are infected. So they have no system, no backups. So it's really important that people know exactly what to do in the event of this type of emergency. We get asked a lot, should you pay the ransom? And it's a very difficult question to answer. Generally, the cybersecurity division of the government, the police, Avant, general advice is not to pay because you only perpetuate the problem. However, we've certainly had, generally the ransom demand is not excessive. It's not a huge amount. It's like 1,000, 2,000, you know, 5,000, that type of amount. It wouldn't be terrible in terms of the business if they had to pay it. And the disruption to the business is massive. I will show you a link later to a cybersecurity resource page that has a podcast where I interviewed a practice that had a big cyber attack. It was really high profile here in Vic when it happened. And they had 5 weeks with no access to their patient records. And so, and the request for payment was $3,000 per server, and they had 3 servers. And in the end, they negotiated it down to $1,000 per server. And after 5 weeks, they paid the $3,000 and got their data back. But you can understand that 5 weeks of no patient information, $3,000 seems like a really cheap price to pay to get it all back. And also you can imagine how terrible it was for this practice staff in this practice, because they had the old data, they had the new data that they'd created. Their IT team had made a new set of patient records, plus in the interim they had hard copy paper data. So they had 3 forms of data that they had to amalgamate together. I mean, what a pain. So $3,000 doesn't seem too expensive for that, which is not to say that the advice is generally that you shouldn't pay, but every practice has to make that decision for themselves. We often get asked if you can still see patients, and yes, of course, but you should have pre-planned for this, and you should need to know how you're going to do that prior to needing to do it. So, for example, a box in some storage room somewhere that has hard copy paper record, blank patient progress notes, a hard copy of staff contact details, a hard copy of patient contact details, you know, printing off week by week patient appointment list, so that you've got a hard copy of it if you ever need it, that type of thing, to get yourself set up. You know, in that box of emergency supplies, something like the contact details for radiology, pathology, all those places, so that you can, one person's job should be to call them and get all the recent, you know, results from the last week or the last month sent through a second time, so that you've got them all current. So planning and preparation. Now, a cybersecurity attack doesn't always mean a data breach, and a data breach isn't always related to cybersecurity, but the two things often go hand in hand. So, for example, this practice that I interviewed in Melbourne, their data was locked up within their own system. They couldn't access it, but they could prove that no data had escaped outside of their firewall. So there was no data breach per se, it was just locked up so that they couldn't access it. So in that instance, they didn't need to make a data breach notification. However, once the practice data cybersecurity ransomware thing hit the media, then the privacy commissioner contacted the practice and said, why haven't you notified us that you've had this cyber incident? And they said, we didn't have to notify you because we can prove that no data left our system. And then the privacy commissioner said, prove it. So then they had to go through this whole process with their IT division about how they could prove that nothing had escaped their firewall. So in terms of a data breach, this is when some information from your practice is lost or leaked out. And it most commonly happens, you can see in the red there is healthcare providers. Data breaches most commonly happens in the health sector. And of those breaches that occur in the health sector, 65% of them are those malicious cybersecurity type attacks. 30% of them can be related to human error. So that's sending the wrong information to the wrong person, or unintentionally releasing some information. You know, it's taking a laptop and losing it, or putting data on a USB and then losing it. That type of incident. And there is a flow chart on our website about what you need to do if you need to notify the privacy commissioner of a data breach. And you need to make sure that you are aware of your obligations and that your systems and processes can address any issues that you may have in terms of things like third-party providers, and if you do lose information, what strategies you can put in place to mitigate that. This is the type of thing that the privacy commissioner wants to know. They want to know if you lose a little bit of information for a lot of people, or if you lose really significant information for a couple of people. Both those sort of ends of the spectrum they're interested in hearing about, but they also want to know, have you done something to mitigate that? So if you lost a USB or if you lost a laptop, was it password protected? Can anyone else get access to the information on it? And if you say, we lost this information, but no one can get access to it because we had good mitigation strategies in place, the privacy commissioner is generally unsatisfied with that. In terms of policies and procedures, as you know how much we like these here at Avant, so certainly having a privacy policy about the behaviour that staff should be doing in terms of front desk communication, in terms of sending emails, in terms of storing patient data. There should be a privacy policy that's patient focused, that's available to patients on your website or in your waiting rooms, and it should outline what you do with their data and how they can access it and how they can make a complaint about it. And then also you need to have a data breach response plan for data breaches, and particularly data breaches that aren't related to a cyber attack, data breaches that are the lost USB or the email going to the wrong person, or the results being sent to the wrong person, those types of data breaches, how to contain them, how to assess them, how to analyze them if they're put someone at risk of serious harm, and who to notify if that was to happen. If you have a cybersecurity incident or a data breach leak, or both, really the communication that occurs from the practice to the patients after such an event is really critical. And often the complaints that are made not so much because of the event, but it's more about how the practice responded to the event in terms of trying to cover it up, or in terms of being honest and accountable. So not to say something not to make a statement along the lines of this terrible thing happened to us and poor us, but more to say something that, you know, this is what happens to our systems and we're on it, and, you know, we have good security in place and we're confident that the data is safe, or, you know, we are acting, we are doing something, we are, you know, taking responsibility for it. That type of response is much more amenable to patients when they need to hear what's been going on. You should certainly be transparent. You should certainly just convey the fact that you're on top of it, and that you're, you know, competent, and that you're getting the experts in. One thing that I didn't say that I will just say is that the IT team that helps you when you've forgotten your password, or helps you when your systems are not working correctly, is not necessarily the best IT team to analyze your systems from a security point of view. And we've certainly had lots of situations with practices where they've had a really bad experience, where they've relied on one IT team to be responsible for their security, and that hasn't gone well. When there's been an attack, they've been let down. So we would always suggest you have an IT team for day-to-day things, and a second team to look at the security, or if you're running with one IT team, get a third party to do, you know, every second year or something, to come and do a review of your systems and to give advice about whether they're secure, just to get a second opinion, because like anything, a second opinion is a good thing. I'm just running out of time, but I just wanted to show you, this is the page that I've sent the link through in the attachments. It's our cybersecurity page. There's another one on data breach. On this page, there's three 15-minute e-learning courses about responding to a data breach, or managing a privacy issue, or managing a security system breach. That would be really good for your staff to be able to do as part of their ongoing training. And just to finish off my section, and we'll do questions at the end, if you don't have a practice insurance policy that covers cyber insurance, maybe you should think about it. Get the experts to help. Don't rely necessarily on your current team to do the security side of your IT thing. Really be vigilant about updating and training your staff, and back everything up. And now I'm going to pass over to Martin to talk about the second half of this session. Thanks everyone. I'll see you at the end for questions.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, so Ruth, can you progress to the next slide? So I'll just give you a cue. Great. So in relation to privacy breaches, what we've seen in our data at Avant, they constitute about 2% of total claims, but that's not to minimise the significance of them whatsoever, because they can cause a lot of stress for practices and health practitioners as a whole. Usually when a privacy breach occurs, it's not only significantly impacts the patient, but the health privacy commissioner will ask basically please explain. So what occurred and what mitigation measures will you put in place going forward? And then there's also the regulatory body, so APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, which may look at the individual roles of health practitioners in how that privacy breach occurred, and they will look to see basically whether there was unsatisfactory performance or unprofessional conduct or professional misconduct for that matter. So when we talk about privacy breaches, we're looking basically at the spectrum of the information collection cycle. So from the very end, the beginning, at the point of collecting information, to then uploading the information, ensuring that it's complete, accurate, up to date to your systems, then to disclosing that information within the treating team or externally to third parties, to then the destruction of the information. So the privacy breaches can occur at any point in that cycle. So from the outset, with collecting information, it usually you would have you need to have a patient privacy policy, as Ruth alluded to earlier, which details essentially the 11 health privacy principles, which are contained in our in the Health Records Act, and it's as you can see here in this sample privacy policy, it goes from basically why we're collecting the information, we basically explain to patients we need it to treat you and to provide care, and to we may need to disclose this information under use of disclosure with specialists, so sending them your test results, and then it also details how you can access your health record to the patient, and then as well as where you can direct complaints. So it's being very open and transparent, and that's one of the privacy principles, one of those 11 privacy principles that I referred to earlier. Next slide, Ruth. Okay, so in terms of communication, where there's increasing expectation that people want things communicated instantly. So especially patients, having very high expectations these days. And it's not just patients. We're finding organisations being very critical of health services for their slow transmission of information. So the coroners have said on a couple of occasions in a couple of inquests where they've actually criticised practices for not using the use of electronic communication to send information between doctors and specialists, and whether those practices have sent it via the mail, and the coroners have said, well, that was took forever for that information to be disseminated or communicated to that other specialist, and the patients had a complication and in the interim. So there's growing pressure to get up to speed in terms of technology. But it depends on your own appetite, your risk appetite in your practice, because some practices have a blanket policy of no, we don't use emails to communicate with patients whatsoever. It's got to be via phone or some other face-to-face communication with a doctor. So it comes down to your individual appetite and the risks that you're willing to take on, and part and parcel of that is having policies and procedures to detail what you will entertain and engage in, and what you won't. So if we go to the next slide. So if you are a practice that decides, okay, we are going to use SMS and emails as a form of communication with our patients, then having a policy that basically details to your staff what can and can't be shared using those mediums. So there might be very sensitive information that you decide that should not be sent via email. So everyone's on the same page. We also suggest that you get consent from your patients from the very outset. So whether it's on the patient registration form when they first sign up to the practice as a new patient, and there's a tick box that says, would you like SMS reminders, or would you like information sent to you via email and the like. So they turn their mind to it and consciously consent yes or no to those various mediums. Otherwise, if it's an existing patient, then it may be when they ring up for a phone appointment, just confirming, saying, are you happy to receive a text message reminder 24 hours before your appointment. And if they give their verbal consent, having the staff document that in the file, saying patient gave verbal consent for a text message reminder to be sent. Yeah, thanks. Next slide. So in terms of email, there's nothing to say that you can't use email to communicate with patients. What the Privacy Commissioner and the RACGP have said basically is that you need to use reasonable steps or reasonable measures to protect that patient's privacy and their private information. So they acknowledge that encrypted emails is not necessarily feasible when communicating with patients, because they won't necessarily have the software or capability at their end to encrypt that email and read the contents. So whereas if you're communicating with another medical practice or another health entity, then there is an expectation that you use some form of secure platform to transfer and transmit that information. So whether it's best practice or Genie or medical director, where the information is less likely to be decoded during its interception or transmission from one practice to another. So going back to communicating with patients via email, there are certain measures you need to be mindful of. So one feature would be to send a template generic email to that patient saying, please be aware that email communication is not a secure form of transmission of information. If you are accepting of receiving your results or your reports via this medium, please reply to this email. So that way, that the patient expresses their consent and acknowledgement of the risks that email entails. And then by having them respond, you obviously think, well, they've got the correct email address here, so then you can send the information to that patient via email. Other layers of security you should sort of consider as well is not just sending health information in the body of their email, but as an attachment, so a PDF password protected attachment, and that password may be, you say to the patient, the password to unlock this attachment is the last 6 digits of your mobile number, or it could be your date of birth. And that's not an unreasonable way of communicating with individuals. For example, the medical board, when they send correspondence to doctors saying you've received a complaint and we want you to address X, Y, and Z issues and please explain, they do that very method in that they send an attachment to the doctor and they say to unlock the attachment, it's your date of birth. And that's a secure, a reasonable measure, as I was referring to before, to ensure that if it does, for some reason, go astray, that email, or go to the wrong recipient, then that recipient who wasn't meant to receive that email won't necessarily have that information to unlock that attachment. So it's, again, putting in those reasonable measures and features. And then there's the other things in that slide there about use of auto replies to automatically send off an email to a patient, say, listen, we don't accept email correspondence, or we don't engage in any discussions about clinical matters, and please also be aware that emails is not a secure form of information exchange. So you can use those auto reply features to your advantage as well, and use it. And the other thing would be having disclaimers in your email as well. So if you're the wrong recipient or unintended recipient, please contact the practice on this phone number as a matter of urgency. And so you can you see those disclaimers from time to time. Next slide, Ruth. So and the next one. So with SMS text messaging, as I said before, ensure that you've got the patient's consent for them to receive text messages, because some patients may not be happy with that, because they may have like a family member pick up their phone and see there's a text message from family planning, for example, and then that might lead to questions as to, oh, why'd you go to family planning, and then that may reveal that they had a termination of pregnancy or what have you. So don't automatically assume that patients want to receive a text message. They need to specifically consent to receiving those messages. And then when you do get consent of a patient and you send them a text message, keeping it at a high level, not going into any detail. So please be advised that it could be this is a message from ABC Medical Clinic. Can you please contact us on this phone number to arrange a an appointment. So just keeping it very high level. So in the event that someone does see that text message because their settings on their smartphone pops up on the lock screen, they won't necessarily know that the detail of that of why the medical practice is contacting or recalling that patient. And then, also ensuring that you have an unsubscribe facility as well. So if the patient decides to change their mind and decide that they don't want any more text message reminders, then there's a way they can go about that. So policies are, stock standard thing in practices. So having a policy relating to emails and text messaging is a prudent thing to do. It will go into detail about, who is the authorized individuals of the practice to send and receive emails and communications via electronic means. So usually we say have like a 2 or 3 go-to people at the practice for being the key go-to persons for coordinating the email reminder or text message reminder system. So that way, you can attribute accountability to an individual and follow up where things go wrong. And then being mindful that the policy should go into detail about how you capture those communications in the patient record, because that is health information, and there's a requirement in the Health Records Act that all health information should be kept in a collated area and kept for 7 years. So making sure that you keep track of all that. Okay, so just changing focus to social media. Social media has a lot of benefits, but there's also a lot of considerations that you need to keep in mind in terms of security, because with messaging, so whether it's Snapchat or someone posts something on Facebook, that may linger over time, in that someone may screenshot a particular Snapchat or a particular post that someone's put on their Facebook page, and that can be quite insulting to someone else, or constitute defamation. So it's something that you need to remind your staff in a social media policy about what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate in terms of social media use, because it has the potential to stay around forever. So in that social media policy, you should dictate to your staff that they must abide by confidentiality. So the mere fact that they redact a patient's name or crop out their face doesn't necessarily mean that someone out there in the realm of social media won't be able to reconstruct who that post relates to or who that image relates to, because it's basically like pieces of a puzzle. So you don't necessarily know what other pieces people hold and are able to decipher who that relates to. So if you, for example, take a photo of a patient's arm or leg and show the wound on social media page, that image, while it doesn't capture the patient's face, may nevertheless capture a distinctive tattoo or a distinctive birthmark that someone out there in social media land is able to ascertain who that image relates to, and then that creates a breach of that patient's privacy. So it's best to dictate to staff that where possible, don't post anything about your work life. So whether it's about patients or whether about other colleagues, and this could be just mapped out in a social media policy that says what the expected standard is. And also too, with that, where staff have personal views about vaccines or about COVID or any other matter for that reason, they need to be aware that patients can sometimes work out that that particular staff member works at that practice, because on the practice's website they've got, you know, the list of names of the doctors and the nurses and the admin staff, and they can say, oh, well, that person's an anti-vaxxer and they work at that practice. It can cause a lot of flow-on effects. So it's very important to stress to staff to keep their personal posts very separate from their professional posts. Next slide. Yeah, defamation was a topic I sort of just touched on before, in that if a particular staff member posts something in a public domain or in a group where it's derogatory about another individual, in that it minimises their reputation or defames their character, then that could constitute a civil action known as defamation, and that could cause a lot of tension, and obviously, you know, there'll be damages if the court finds in the favour of the person that's defamed. So something also to keep in mind. Next slide, Ruth. So yeah, I guess the sum of social media is it has its advantages in that you can disseminate information at a rapid pace to a large network of people. So it can foster collegiality. It can, you know, it can be, you know, developing of professional networks. But the important point to stress to staff is that their professional image is intertwined with their personal image, and they need to keep the two separate. And so the way they can do that is ensuring that they don't accept friend requests from patients, because straight away when you start to add patients to your friends on social media and the like, then there's a lack of objectivity. Those patients will then expect special treatment, and it can just cause blurring of the lines. And so it's best to keep the personal and professional life separate. And that may be, yeah, putting on really rigid privacy settings. In terms of the professional account, so like, you know, most practices will have a professional account for the practice, and that can be a great platform to remind patients about, you know, it's vaccination time, or to come in for flu shots, or you know, to come in for, you know, their regular checkups, you know, pap smears and breast checks and whatever else. So that it can be an excellent platform in getting out public messaging. The things to be aware of though with those practice websites is, you know, you don't breach copyright and intellectual property, so you don't steal images from the net and use them as your own, because that can, you know, can cause flow-on effects in terms of fines and the like, or people trying to claim that you've breached their intellectual property. And then the other things to be mindful of is the advertising guidelines from APRA. So the advertising guidelines specifically state that you can't use patient testimonials, you can't, you know, offer promos without, you know, discussing the terms and conditions. So basically, the gist of the advertising guidelines is, you know, keep it very factual information, and don't make unsubstantiated claims in your advertising. Next one. So just my last slide. In terms of key messaging, social media has its perks, but also its pitfalls. Be mindful of patient boundaries, confidentiality and professionalism, so respect for one another, and this could all be inbuilt into your social media policy. And as we saw before, you know, what goes online can stay online for perpetuity. So just being mindful of, you know, to slow down, stop and think before responding to posts. I think that was it, Ruth.
Thanks everyone. Just trying to get my camera back on as well. If you, Helene, if you've got any questions for us.
Hi everyone, it's Helene here. I actually don't have any questions that have come in yet. So if you've got any questions, please type them in the questions box, because we do have 10 minutes left. So you've got time.
So fast.
No, it seemed to get through it quicker when there's no audience, like no interruptions and stuff, like face to face. I found that with a lot of the a lot of the webinars. So I'm just waiting to see if there's any questions come in. Is there anything the two of you want to speak about while I'm waiting?
I guess just to reiterate the value of having practice with your staff for all of these situations that may occur, and also because I'm an educator, the value of education and getting your staff really up to scratch before these events happen, so that you know what to do and how to do it. You know, this is sort of slightly off topic, but there was an example of a security alarm that was at the reception desk and also in the different consulting rooms of a practice. And although it was put in place, no one had ever run through what to do if it sounded. And one of the doctors had a situation and they pressed the security alarm and no one even knew what the noise was. And everyone was standing around going, what's that noise? What's that? Oh, I haven't heard that before. And the poor doctor was struggling in a consulting room with an aggressive patient. So it just shows the value of not only having these things in place, but also, you know, having practices and trial runs of what to do if something like that occurs. At Avant recently, we had a practice run where they sent out this phishing email to see who would click on it. And that's a good sort of thing for your IT security team to you know, send through the practice, just to see who understands the risk of phishing emails and how to identify them and who needs more education on it. I think the industry average is like 5 or 6% of people in your business will click on it, so you know who to target in terms of further education.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Still no questions, so everyone must have got what they wanted out of that event. Could I just take the opportunity to thank you both again and Avant for all your, oh, hang on, I've got a question come in. I'll just do my thank yous first. Thank you for everything you do for us, and to the attendees, don't forget to fill out your survey report with any future topics you would like for 2022. So the question is, do you have an example or know where I can get a copy of an email automatic reply?
I think we may well have an example, but the other thing I'm pretty sure we have an example in our emailing patients fact sheet, but I'll certainly have a look at it for you and send something through to Helene and Jade. What we did when we wrote that example though was we just looked at a lot of different practice emails and from a legal perspective looked at what was a good response. Sometimes what we found was that practices were sending out a response that was really a business response and inappropriate for healthcare. So it talked about copyright and things like that rather than being healthcare specific, such as, you know, this is an unattended email address, in an emergency you should call 000, you know, that type of response is an appropriate one. This, you know, this email address is not regularly monitored, etc.
Great, thanks, Ruth. Now there's no more questions, so we will finish the session off. If any questions come to mind in the meantime, just type them in, send through an email to us, and we can certainly pass that on to Ruth and Martin. So thank you again, and we'll see you again. I'm sure we will.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.